Ryan's office revenge.
You need to know your place, Jeff. Richard Walsh didn't even look up when he said it. Just kept shuffling papers on his desk like they were the most important documents in the world. We were sitting in conference room 3A at SecureLink Dynamics, the one with the broken air conditioning and that persistent smell of burnt coffee that never quite went away. I'm Geoffrey Morrison, 53 years old, and I'd been keeping this company's cybersecurity infrastructure running for 25 years. That Tuesday morning in March, I thought I was just going to another routine salary review. Turns out I was about to learn exactly what 25 years of loyalty was worth to them. Rich slid a paper across the table. His watch caught the fluorescent light expensive, probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. This outlines your updated compensation structure for the upcoming fiscal year, he said in that flat HR voice they all perfect after years of delivering bad news. I looked down at the document. Chief Security Engineer, 25-year service record. Merit increase 2.8%. Below that, in smaller print like they hoped I wouldn't notice. Compensation aligned with organizational equity standards. I'd seen that phrase before. Corporate speak for, we've decided what you're worth and arguing won't change our minds. 2.8%, I said quietly, correct. That falls within the standard range for senior technical staff. I leaned back in that uncomfortable chair. The Navy taught me patience, how to stay calm under pressure. 8 years working on aircraft carrier communications gave me that discipline. You learn real quick when you're troubleshooting satellite arrays at 2 a.m. during storm conditions that panic doesn't fix anything. Step-by-step problem solving does. But this wasn't equipment failure. This was something different. Something that felt like betrayal. What about Scott Hamilton? Rich's pen stopped moving for just a second. Then he forced a smile that looked like it hurt. I'm not sure what you're asking. Scott Hamilton, the new director of security strategy. He started 8 months ago. The smile got tighter. You know he's making nearly 50% more than me, don't you? Rich set his pen down carefully, buying time. Scott brings different qualifications to the organization. He has an MBA from a prestigious business school. He has strategic vision that aligns with executive objectives. Different qualifications. In the Navy, when we were setting up secure communication links for carrier groups, qualifications meant you could do the job when lives depended on it. You either knew how to configure encrypted channels under enemy jamming, or you didn't. You could troubleshoot signal degradation during combat operations, or you couldn't. There wasn't any MBA that taught you how to keep communication systems operational when people were shooting at your ship. And I have 25 years of building every security system this company runs, I said evenly. I've personally stopped at least 35 major breaches that could have shut us down completely. I prevented the Iranian ransomware attack in 2019 that took down half our competitors. I built the monitoring system that caught the Chinese hackers before they accessed classified data. I've saved this company millions in avoided downtime and regulatory penalties, but Scott has an MBA, so that's worth 50% more. Different roles command different market rates. Rich said, his voice getting that careful HR neutrality. Leadership positions are benchmarked differently than technical positions. Leadership positions. Scott Hamilton couldn't configure a basic firewall if his life depended on it. But he could make PowerPoint slides about synergistic security paradigms and leveraging cloud-native frameworks for optimal threat mitigation. Apparently that qualified as leadership in the new SecureLink. So technical expertise is worth less than a business degree, even when that technical expertise is literally keeping the company secure. Geoff, I understand you're frustrated. I'm not frustrated, I interrupted. I'm clarifying. Because it sounds like you're telling me that someone with zero understanding of our security infrastructure, zero experience with our systems, and zero contribution to actually protecting anything is worth more than I am. I just want to make sure I'm hearing that correctly. Rich folded his hands on the table, professional, controlled, unmoved by logic or fairness. We benchmark compensation against external market data. Leadership roles command premium salaries. Credentials matter. Translation, know your place. I thought about my kids, Steve and Julie, both graduated from college now but still paying off student loans. I thought about the grandkid on the way, minus Julie was 6 months pregnant. I thought about Linda, my ex-wife, and the alimony payments that would continue for another 3 years. I thought about being 53 years old with 12 years until retirement, supposedly in my peak earning years. Here I was with more cybersecurity knowledge than anyone else in the building, making $97,000 while some kid fresh out of business school who needed me to explain what a VPN actually did was pulling down $145,000. And here's the kicker. Scott's father sat on the board of directors. Not that anyone mentioned that little detail during his hiring process. Then I reached into my bag. Rich tensed slightly, probably thinking I was pulling out a legal document or a list of grievances. Instead, I took out a single piece of paper, folded once, and placed it on top of his compensation document. My resignation letter, his eyes dropped to it. I watched the blood drain from his face as he read the first line. Effective immediately, I resigned from my position as Chief Security Engineer at SecureLink Dynamics. Geoff, he started, voice cracking. I emailed a copy to your inbox at 8:47 a.m. I said calmly, "You'll see it when you check your email, along with copies to my direct manager, the CTO, and the VP of Operations." He blinked at the signature, at the date, at words that couldn't be taken back or negotiated away. "You don't need to make this decision right now. This is a significant step. Talk to your manager, sleep on it. We can revisit the numbers. I've been sleeping on it for 25 years, I said, standing up. This is me waking up. Rich opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish gasping for air. "You told me to know my place in this organization," I said, picking up my bag. "So I do, and my place is somewhere else." I left the resignation letter on the table and walked out. The click of the conference room door closing behind me was the most satisfying sound I'd heard in years. Look, let me back up and tell you how I got to that moment. How a quiet, underpaid cybersecurity engineer turned one dismissive sentence into the most expensive hour and a half in SecureLink Dynamics history. When I started at SecureLink in 1999, I was 28 years old and fresh out of my computer science program on the GI Bill. The Navy had given me 8 years of real-world experience with secure communications, but civilian cybersecurity was still finding its feet back then. Most companies treated IT security like an afterthought, something you bolted on after everything else was built. SecureLink was different, at least in theory. They specialized in defense contracts, which meant they understood that security wasn't optional. But understanding the concept and implementing it properly, two very different things. My first day, the CTO at the time walked me through what they called their security architecture. It was more like a digital house of cards held together with prayer and good intentions. Legacy systems talking to modern applications through interfaces that should have been retired in 1995, firewall rules that contradicted each other, monitoring systems that generated so many false alarms that the operations team had learned to ignore them completely. "Think you can make sense of this?" he asked, gesturing at a whiteboard covered in network diagrams that looked like someone had let a toddler loose with colored markers. I'd seen worse in the Navy. Military networks often grew organically as new systems got added, without anyone thinking about how they'd integrate with existing infrastructure. The difference was that in the military, when something broke, people could die. That tends to focus your attention on doing things right the first time. "Give me 6 months," I told him. "I'll map out what we actually have. Then we can figure out what it should be." That was the beginning of 25 years of building, fixing, and protecting systems that kept this company running. I documented every weird configuration choice, every undocumented workaround, every critical dependency that wasn't obvious from the architecture diagrams. I created monitoring systems that actually worked, incident response procedures that people could follow under pressure, and security protocols that balanced protection with usability. Along the way, I prevented more disasters than I bothered counting. The Iranian ransomware campaign in 2019 that crippled our biggest competitor never touched our systems because I'd implemented network segmentation that isolated critical functions. The Chinese hackers who tried to access classified data in 2021 triggered alerts I'd built specifically to catch that type of intrusion pattern. The database corruption incident in 2022 that should have taken us offline for days was resolved in 4 hours because I documented the exact recovery procedures after seeing a similar failure 3 years earlier. But here's what I learned over those 25 years: minus competence and loyalty don't automatically translate into respect or compensation. Every year I'd get my 3% raise and my performance review praising my technical excellence and institutional knowledge. Every year, I'd watch new hires with business degrees get promoted past me into positions where they made decisions about systems they didn't understand. The breaking point came 6 months ago when I discovered Scott Hamilton's offer letter by accident. I was looking for a technical specification that Jason Brooks had promised to upload to our shared drive when I clicked the wrong folder. There it was. Scott's employment agreement, sitting right there in plain view. Base salary $145,000, signing bonus $30,000, annual bonus target 25%. Stock options that made my original 2,000 shares look like pocket change. I stared at those numbers for a long time. Then I opened my most recent pay stub. Base salary 97,000 lines, no signing bonus ever. Annual bonus target 8%, which I'd actually received exactly 3 times in 25 years. Stock options. Still sitting on those same 2,000 shares from my original offer in 1999. 8 months at the company. 0 cybersecurity knowledge. 0 systems saved from catastrophic failure, making 50% more than I was, plus benefits I'd never even been offered. Scott Hamilton had never written a line of code, couldn't explain the difference between a vulnerability scan and a penetration test, and needed me to walk him through our incident response procedures every time we had a security alert. But he had an MBA from some fancy business school, and more importantly, his father was William Hamilton board member since 2018. Not that anyone mentioned that little family connection during the hiring process. Amazing how those details slip through the cracks. That evening, I went home to my empty apartment and did something I hadn't done in 10 years. I updated my resume, really updated it. Not just the annual courtesy refresh for HR files that nobody ever read. I documented every major system I'd built, every crisis I'd prevented, every innovation I'd implemented that saved the company money or reduced risk. The list was longer than I expected. The intrusion detection system that caught the state-sponsored attack in 2018, the network segmentation project that prevented the ransomware outbreak from spreading in 2020, the encryption upgrade that kept us compliant when new federal requirements hit in 2022, the monitoring system overhaul that reduced false alarms by 87% while catching 23% more actual threats. I'd been so focused on doing the work that I'd never really cataloged what I'd accomplished. Looking at it all laid out, I realized I wasn't just another IT guy. I was the institutional memory of SecureLink dynamics. I was the reason their systems worked. Period. I sent my resume to 4 recruiters I'd been politely ignoring for years. Within 48 hours, my phone was ringing. Within 2 weeks, I had 5 serious offers. Within 3 weeks, I'd accepted 1 principal security architect at CyberShield Technologies in Denver. $15,300 base salary, 20% bonus target, real stock options that might actually be worth something. And here's the thing that really got me during the interview process. When I described some of the security challenges I'd solved at SecureLink, the CTO actually took notes. He asked follow-up questions. He understood that technical expertise wasn't just a nice-to-have, it was the foundation everything else was built on. All I needed was the right moment to leave SecureLink. Rich Walsh handed it to me on a silver platter. By 9:04 a.m., my security badge had been flagged for deactivation. By 9:11 a.m., my system access was being revoked across 47 production environments. The IT department moved fast when they wanted to. Ironic, considering how slow they were when I needed resources for actual security improvements. By 9:17 a.m., I'd cleared my desk, boxed up my personal coffee mug, the one that said world's greatest problem solver, a gag gift from the team after I'd fixed a particularly nasty database corruption issue, and walked past 6 colleagues who suddenly became very interested in their keyboards. Word travels fast in a small office, and everyone knew something was happening. Jason Brooks caught my eye as I headed for the elevator. He was 29 years old, smart kid with 18 months of experience, and I'd been mentoring him on incident response procedures. The look on his face told me he understood exactly what my departure meant for him. All those systems I'd built, all that institutional knowledge I carried, Jason was about to inherit responsibility for things he'd only ever seen from the outside. I gave him a small nod. Good luck, kid. You're gonna need it. The thing is, I wasn't being vindictive. I'd actually written extensive documentation over the years. Detailed runbooks, troubleshooting guides, system architecture diagrams with notes explaining why everything was configured the way it was. The problem? It was all in my personal notebook sitting in a filing cabinet at my apartment. Company policy said all documentation should be stored on company servers, but when you're the only one who understands the systems well enough to document them properly, and you're constantly being pulled into crisis mode, sometimes you just write things down wherever you can. Nobody had ever asked if such documentation existed. They just assumed that if something broke, I'd fix it, For 25 years, that assumption had been correct. By 9:25 a.m., the first critical alert started screaming. Here's what most people don't understand about complex cybersecurity infrastructure. It's not like a car where you can pop the hood, see a broken belt, and replace it. It's more like the human body, interconnected systems that depend on each other in ways that aren't always obvious. When something goes wrong, the symptoms can show up anywhere. And finding the root cause requires understanding how all the pieces fit together. I'd been that understanding for 25 years. Every weird configuration choice had a reason. Usually because I'd learned the hard way what happened when you did things the obvious way. Every undocumented dependency existed because some crisis years ago had forced a quick fix that became permanent infrastructure. Every workaround had become critical to daily operations. The database synchronization failure that hit at 9:25 a.m. was a perfect example. It wasn't a complete system crash. That would have been obvious and relatively easy to diagnose. Instead, it was a slow degradation. The primary intrusion detection system started throwing cascading errors, missing real threats while generating false positives at an exponential rate. The worst kind of security failure, you can't trust what it's telling you, but you can't turn it off because you'd be flying blind. Jason was on call. Poor kid. He did everything right, checked the standard runbooks, examined log files, looked for patterns in the error messages. But what was happening wasn't covered in any standard documentation. This was a database corruption issue triggered by a specific combination of network load and data processing patterns. I'd seen it exactly once before, 14 months earlier during a particularly aggressive penetration test we'd run for one of our government clients. The solution involved temporarily decoupling the analysis engine from the data ingestion pipeline, manually purging corrupted transaction logs, and restarting services in a very specific sequence. Miss any step or do them out of order, and you'd make things worse. I documented all of this in my notebook along with the monitoring queries needed to detect the problem early and prevent it from happening again. Jason escalated to Michelle Parker, our senior security analyst. Michelle was good, smart, dedicated, 9 years of experience, but she'd never seen this particular failure mode. Nobody had except me. When I'd fixed it the first time, I'd done it quietly, added some monitoring to catch it early, and moved on to the next crisis. That's what you do when you're the only one who understands the systems well enough to keep them running. Michelle did everything right, too. She opened multiple terminal sessions, examined database logs, looked for correlation patterns. She could see the symptoms, response times increasing, false positive rates climbing, threat detection accuracy dropping, but she couldn't see the cause. The error messages were generic database complaints that could mean anything without knowing the specific sequence of events that led to the corruption. It was like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. At 10:02 a.m., Scott Hamilton walked into the operations center. I could picture him perfectly, pressed khakis, button-down shirt, that slight smile that said he was about to solve everything with strategic thinking and process optimization. "Why is the dashboard red?" he asked, looking around like someone had forgotten to water the office plants. "We're investigating a performance issue with the intrusion detection system," Jason replied, not looking up from his screens. "Investigating doesn't help our defense contracts. Can't you just restart it?" The mental scream Jason must have felt in that moment. In cybersecurity, just restart it is like a surgeon saying just cut it out without knowing what it is. You can make things much worse very quickly. "We need to identify the root cause first," Jason said, maintaining professional composure that I was proud of. "If we restart without understanding the problem, we could lose critical log data or trigger cascade failures in dependent systems. How long will that take?" "I don't know. This isn't a standard failure mode. I've never seen anything like this before." Scott pulled out his phone, clearly frustrated that his simple solution wasn't being implemented immediately. "I'm calling Vincent." Vincent Carey, our CEO, arrived 9 minutes later. I knew him well enough to predict his reaction, the carefully controlled expression that meant he was calculating potential damage to the company's reputation and contracts. Vincent was the kind of executive who understood that cybersecurity was important without having any real idea what it actually involved day to day. The first question out of his mouth was predictable. "Where's Jeff?" The question I'd been waiting for, even though I wasn't there to hear it. "He resigned this morning," Scott said, probably trying to make it sound routine, over a compensation issue. I would have paid money to see Vincent's face in that moment. 25 years of preventing exactly this kind of disaster, and they'd let me walk out the door over what amounted to pocket change for a company with $180 million in annual revenue. You let him walk today? Vincent's voice apparently had that edge that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. I didn't let him do anything, Scott said defensively. He made an irrational decision based on unrealistic salary expectations. Irrational? That word probably echoed in Vincent's head as he watched the company's security infrastructure crumble in real time. What was irrational was thinking you could run a cybersecurity company without respecting the people who actually understood cybersecurity. Vincent left the operations center immediately. At exactly 10 to 25 a.m., an hour and a half after I'd placed that resignation letter on Rich's desk, Vincent Carey was standing outside my apartment building, knocking on my door like someone whose entire world was falling apart. Which technically it was. "Jeff," he said, when I opened the door, "no pleasantries, no small talk. We need you back immediately." I looked at him through the gap in my doorway. His normally immaculate suit was wrinkled, tie loosened, hair disheveled. This was a man who prided himself on control, on having contingency plans for contingency plans. Seeing him rattled was almost worth 25 years of being undervalued. "Almost, I don't work there anymore," I said. "I know, but our defense contract systems are completely down. The Pentagon is asking questions. We can't process any classified data. Nobody can figure out why." "That sounds like your problem, not mine." His jaw clenched. "Jeff, please, just for today. We'll pay you consulting rates, whatever you want." I shook my head slowly. "No. Why not?" "Because an hour and a half ago, your company made it very clear what I'm worth to them, so now you get to learn what your systems are worth without me." I closed the door and turned the deadbolt. Vincent knocked 4 more times, each series getting more desperate. Through the peephole, I watched him pace in the hallway. Phone pressed to his ear, probably coordinating damage control. Then I heard his footsteps retreating toward the elevator back to a crisis that was getting worse by the minute. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat down to read the CyberShield Technologies employment contract I'd already signed. My phone buzzed constantly, text messages, missed calls, notifications from an emergency incident channel someone had added me to despite my access being revoked. I ignored all of it. The outage lasted 16 hours. I didn't watch it happen in real time, but I heard about it later from Jason, who called me that evening exhausted and frustrated. "Here's what I missed." By 2 p.m., 4 major defense contracts worth a combined $42 million were at risk. The Pentagon had sent an official inquiry about service disruption. The Department of Homeland Security was threatening to suspend SecureLink's security clearance pending investigation. 2 state governments had activated backup cybersecurity protocols, essentially firing SecureLink as their primary contractor. By 4 p.m., Vincent had called in Cyber Crisis Solutions, an emergency consulting firm that specialized in infrastructure crisis recovery. They brought in 5 specialists at $780 per hour each. The lead consultant spent 3 hours examining our systems and finally admitted what everyone already knew without the original architect. This could take days or weeks to fully understand and stabilize. "You're telling me we're dead in the water because one engineer quit?" Vincent asked. "I'm telling you you're dead in the water because you treated that engineer like he didn't matter," the consultant replied. "And now you're learning what happens when institutional knowledge walks out the door." The consulting firm worked through the night. At $3,900 per hour for the team, the bill was climbing toward $95,000 before they'd even identified the root cause of the problem. The breakthrough came at 1:17 a.m. when Jason finally remembered something I'd mentioned in passing months earlier. There was an old wiki page buried deep in our internal knowledge base, something I'd written after a similar incident years ago. It took him 2 hours to find it through the search system. Critical system dependencies and emergency recovery procedures. It had everything: the database synchronization issue, the specific monitoring queries needed to diagnose it, the exact sequence of steps required to recover without triggering secondary failures. Jason followed my documentation step by step. It worked. System stabilized at 3:43 a.m. The consultants packed up their equipment and sent a bill that made everyone sick, but the damage was done. Within the first week, SecureLink lost $42 million in defense contracts. The Pentagon's security review found concerning gaps in institutional knowledge management and personnel retention practices. Translation: they'd noticed that SecureLink had let their most experienced cybersecurity expert walk out the door over a salary dispute. Vincent called an emergency board meeting. 4 executives were asked to pursue other opportunities. Scott Hamilton was quietly reassigned to a strategic advisory role with no budget, no staff, and no real responsibilities. Rich Walsh was terminated for organizational restructuring, though everyone knew it was because he'd managed to lose the most valuable employee in the company over a conversation about knowing your place. The stock price dropped 16% over 2 weeks. Industry publications picked up the story, not the details, but the broad strokes. Defense contractor loses major contracts after key personnel departure. It wasn't hard to read between the lines. 6 months later, Scott Hamilton was fired after the offshore development team he'd hired to modernize our legacy systems caused a data breach that resulted in $8 million in regulatory fines. Turns out credentials and strategic vision don't mean much when you don't understand what you're actually managing. Today, I'm principal cybersecurity consultant working with 3 different firms. My annual income hits $155,000 when you include project bonuses. More importantly, when I say something's going to break, people listen. When I document a vulnerability, it becomes required reading. When I suggest we need to slow down and do something right, nobody tells me to know my place. My place, it turns out, is at the table where decisions get made, where experience is valued over credentials, where the person who actually understands the systems has a voice in how they're managed. SecureLink still exists, but barely. They never recovered those Pentagon contracts. Vincent was replaced 8 months after my departure. The new CEO brought in an entirely new leadership team and spent millions rebuilding their cybersecurity infrastructure from scratch. They're smaller now, more focused. And according to Jason, who stayed through the transition, they actually listen to their technical staff these days. Here's the lesson I learned after 25 years in corporate America. When someone tells you to know your place, believe them. They're showing you exactly how much they value what you bring to the table. You can stay and hope things change, or you can leave and find people who understand what you're actually worth. Your expertise doesn't become more valuable the moment you walk away. It was always that valuable. The difference is that some organizations need to lose what they can't afford to lose before they learn to value what they should have treasured all along. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just respect, finding it somewhere else and letting the consequences speak for themselves. The most dangerous employee isn't the one who threatens to quit. It's the one who quietly stops caring about whether they stay. When a company chooses politics over competence, they're not just losing an employee, they're betting their future on people who don't understand what keeps the lights on.